Hello, my name is Ken Small and I'm an architect in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is part of the frequently asked questions series that we've been posting online to answer people's questions that they ask commonly on the projects that we either do or that we get asked about. Some of these questions we would get asked about and then not do. And so that brings us to today's topic, which is when do I need to get a building permit? If you find this useful, please like, share, and repost, and tell your friends. And if you do decide that you need a building permit, we'd appreciate it if you'd give us a call and talk to us about providing the construction documents that you will probably need to get a building permit. So in this particular area of when do I get a do I need to get a building permit, there are basically two subject areas. One is commercial and the other one's residential. So this video will be about the commercial, although a lot of this does apply to single-family residence. Or the other thing to keep in mind is that multifamily residential is essentially commercial in terms of the building permitting and approval process. So there's a little bit of an attitude in the way the building department works and enforces the rules that if you make a mistake and mess up your own house, that's your own house, so you're the one going to be living with it. But as soon as you're into multifamily, then it's somebody else's house, and so they have a bigger concern for public safety in that situation. Let's just go through some simple questions that commonly get asked. Say you're deciding to pave some land outside your commercial building. Perhaps you have a restaurant, you've decided you're going to put down a large section of concrete flatwork, some people call this sidewalk, and you plan on putting some tables and chairs out there. Do you need a permit? And the answer is yes, you do need a permit, and you'll also probably be subject to planning and zoning. I'm going to stop just at this point and caveat that these explanations are relative to the Las Vegas area and how things are done here. There are multiple municipalities and building departments, but they generally handle things the same. And this is, of course, general advice, and you should refer to the building department specifically if you have a specific question, but for background, this information. So you have in the enforcement area certain criteria that the original commercial building was built under. So much area of landscaping, so many parking spaces, so much area of impervious cover, site hydrology, where all the water goes when it rains and things like that, and what part of this space is used for what. So as soon as you've built a bunch of concrete flatwork outside your restaurant and you put tables on it, basically your restaurant got bigger, which of course is the reason why you're typically doing it, more customers. And so you're back to planning and zoning, and also you will more than likely need a permit for that. So don't do it without a permit. So let's talk about what happens. What are your consequences if you build without permits? The first thing is that say something like this with the sidewalk, they'll generally come in and you'll get a notice, some kind of a legal notice from either planning and zoning or the building department to talk to you about having constructed without permits. If you fail to deal with it and address it properly and get approval, then you'll be asked to remove it. And if you don't remove it, then consequences get progressively uglier: pulling your business license, having the electric utility remove your electric meter, things of that nature. So you don't want to let it go. If you have built something without a permit and have gotten caught at this point, don't try to ignore it. It never ever works out. So best to go in and confess and try to work it out with them. Generally they're pretty reasonable, although Forgiveness is not easier to obtain than permission, so I would hardly suggest obtaining proper permission, i.e. permits and planning and zoning approval before constructing anything. Then moving on to another common question we get, what about an interior remodeling? So you moved into an office space, it already was an office, you just need to do a little bit of work. Are you required to get permits? Yes, you are required to get permits. This is called a tenant improvement, and it requires construction documents. And if you're only building one wall, then it should be relatively easy to draw up a set of plans showing just the one wall. And there are no exceptions. So if you're just building a low wall, you still need a permit, even if it doesn't go all the way up to the ceiling. I've heard carpenters telling customers that, well, if it's shorter than 42 inches or if it's less than a certain height, then can you get by without a permit? Who knows what not getting caught will entail, but are you supposed to get a permit? Yes, you're supposed to get a permit. So what about just installing furniture? Usually just installing furniture does not require a permit. However, you should remember that the next time you pull a business license, or if you have one in progress, then the fire marshal is going to show up, and if you put furniture against the fire door or something like that, you're going to have a problem. If you get into larger furniture, like systems furniture, some people call that cubicles, then you're back to, you do need to pull a permit for that. It's going to be powered, and so you need electrical permit for it, and you're subject to the same regulations as far as distance from the furthest cubicle to a fire door and how far down a dead-end corridor a person can go and things like that. So the same layout criteria is used for cubicles as used for building permanent walls in terms of fire exiting. So yes, you need a permit for that. What about installing equipment? Well, if you have something like a copier and you're just going to roll it in and plug it into the wall, then no, of course not. But if you're physically constructing, you have a crew come out of half a dozen employees, and they're out there for weeks assembling something, then yes, you're going to need a permit for that. So for a number of reasons, one is that it's almost undoubtedly going to need an electrical permit to bring power to it, and the other one is that it can affect fire exiting. But you also need to remember that in Nevada, anything over 400 pounds is subject to earthquake analysis. So if it could fall over and kill somebody in an earthquake, then yes, you need a permit. So it's debatable whether this is a good idea or not, because if you believe more in liberty and you don't want the government telling you what to do all the time, then you probably prefer not to be in such a highly regulated environment. But actually, this number of permit requirements is fairly common throughout the U.S. In a lot of states. I worked in Texas years ago, and you go into a small city and there's no building official, there's no building inspectors, the mayor basically is everything, then sometimes these things don't apply. But as soon as you get into a city of any significant size, then this is pretty much the way it's handled throughout the United States. So let's talk about signage. So I just want to hang a sign. I don't need a permit for that, right? No, actually, you do need a permit if you're hanging an exterior sign. You don't need an architect or an engineer for it. You can just have your sign installer go down and pull a permit. So what don't I need a permit for? Well, we've already talked about furniture. Also finishes only. If you're only changing the finishes, if you rented an old office space and it's looking kind of tired and you're going to get it painted and you're going to install carpet, then no permits are needed for that. Just remember that the building department has the plans for most of these tenant improvements or buildings that already exist, And so if you plan to try to sneak in a wall and not get caught in the course of painting, later on, if there's a fire, if there's an earthquake, if somebody gets hurt, then the evidence is right there that that wall appeared while you were in possession of the suite, and so you're going to be held to account for breaking the law prior to whatever occurrence happened. So it's usually not worth it. And a lot of people just get caught because a disgruntled employee who was fired went and told on them or something like that. And then it ends up being a much more massive headache. And admittedly, it's a headache at the beginning to draw the plans and go down and file and all that, but less so at the beginning than after it's already built, particularly if it's in a place that the building department finds unacceptable later on. So even a low wall, 36 or 42 inches, can affect the fire exiting, and if the fire marshal comes in and he's not happy with it being there, they can just have you remove it regardless. And you don't really have any recourse because you've broken law. But finishes only, definitely allowed. A lot of caution should be exercised in doing this because in certain circumstances there are fire ratings required on the materials that are being installed. So for instance, in a casino you have fire ratings on wallpaper that's being installed, on floor covering, on furniture related to combustibility. You can't just go over to the office supply store and buy a couch and put it in, or a dozen of them. Probably won't be a problem for one, but again, it's an order of magnitude thing. So if you're going to install in 100 hotel rooms a roll-out bed, you might want to consider what all the ramifications of that are, because it isn't just the building code. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's a whole other set of issues and concerns. A lot of these things that don't require building permits, say you've just decided you don't think your front counter looks pretty enough, instead of having a high section and a low section, you want to go in and make it all high, you're probably violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. Since we are in a pretty highly regulated environment throughout the U.S., whenever you find a situation where something doesn't look like you would have done it that way, more than likely there's some regulatory requirement that they're complying with that made it be a little bit different than just a box or the normal way or whatever would be easiest for the carpenter to construct in a lot of these scenarios. So if you have a little mom and pop grocery store and you wonder why the counter isn't the same all the way across, and more than likely it's one of those things which aren't really directly attached to the building code. So it's important to understand that in Nevada, the building department is not tasked with making you comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. They do have some disability regulations, but they're not identical. And so you could go down and get a building permit for something and build it, and on the opening day have a complaint filed against you with the United States Department of Justice for not having complied with the ADA. So getting building permits does not protect you against everything. That's hiring design professionals that you have an expectation that they're going to be familiar with the type of work that they're doing and that they understand how tall the counter should be and what regulations apply and all that. And even with that, design professionals aren't saying that everything they're going to do is going to be perfect, but in these scenarios that I just painted for you, they should really know how. And then let's talk about another situation where you don't need permits, and that's repairs. So for instance, your light switch in your office stopped functioning, you call your maintenance personnel or you call your licensed electrician, and he comes out and yanks out the old electric outlet from 25 years ago and slaps in a new one, and there it works. No permitting required for that at all. However, if you're installing a new electric outlet, you are really supposed to go down and pull a permit for just one outlet. And granted, on enforcement on this isn't very big, but people do it in prominent locations. So if you're installing an electric outlet that's being created, say, on the front door of a building that has a lot of people coming and going, one of those people could be a building inspector that's going to turn you in, or you could have a disgruntled customer or whatever. You don't have to have a drawing to do that. You just have your electrician go down, pay a small fee, pull the permit, and then you have a permit for your electric outlet. So why do you want to do that? Well, again, if you've overloaded the capacity of your system and your building burns down, a lot of times your insurance will not cover you for an illegal act. So we walk into a lot of older facilities that have been in operation for years, and their electric system is operating at 150% of capacity, and you wonder why the place just didn't burn down. Well, that's dumb luck, and if you want to rely on that, that's your choice. But if things are done properly, then proper permits are pulled, and then people are going to act cautiously about doing things that put you at risk. If you just have your nephew who's off after high school come over and install an electric outlet for you, and then the place burns down, you're going to find yourself explaining to your insurance carrier or to your boss or to whoever you're being employed with after you get fired how that came about. So it's really not worth it. But again, a lot of people will just want one more outlet in their office, and they'll just get the electrician to do it without permits, and they don't really suffer any ill consequences. But for that 1 out of 100 that something goes drastically wrong, it's going to be worth it. So that's a simple, straightforward repair, and that counts for if you're taking out a toilet broke. Here's my 15-year-old toilet, I'm putting in a new toilet, or my 15-year-old toilet uses 3 gallons of water and I bought a new toilet that uses a ½ gallon. Those kind of maintenance things, no problem. You don't need a permit for that. But when you get into major maintenance, say again as my example from before, you're in a casino, you're gonna yank out a sewer line that's been in the casino for 40 years, you have to tear out a bunch of ceiling where it's exposed to the public and pull out the pipe and put in new pipe, and it's all very visible. You can get maintenance or repair permit, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, they call it different things, that allows you to just replace more or less in kind. And the reason why they're doing that is so that the inspectors can see that the ceiling that you're pulling out to be able to remove the pipe is being removed and replaced safely, and also that the pipe is properly fastened when it's reinstalled. Back to the earthquake thing, if it was originally installed per earthquake, then it should be installed per earthquake now. And actually, even on a maintenance scenario, you should have the pipe adequately suspended, even if the old one wasn't, to protect it from earthquake. And you're back again to read your insurance policy, but you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you appear to have done something sneaky or not on the up and up, and not according to Hoyle or as good as it could be, because then the pipe falls out of the ceiling, hits somebody in the head, and you're back looking at most business insurance of any kind really doesn't cover you when you've committed an illegal act or done something knowing that it's unsafe. That may not be quite true for a situation where you have employees working under a big organization that the big organization may be insured against the illegal acts of its employees. But if you're watching this, more than likely you're not a senior facilities manager for some billion-dollar casino. So you're a small business, you're wondering, can I just swap this for that? And so this is the kind of scenario that you need to be thinking about, that if you're really having to yank out a bunch of stuff to do this in-kind replacement, then you probably ought to go down and get a repair permit. And pretty much for almost everything you build, as soon as you get out a hammer and nails, as soon as you see a carpenter, as soon as you see an electrician working for more than, say, an hour or so, then you should have to go down and get a building permit. And not all building permits require plans. Not all building permits require that you even physically go down there. You can just have the electrician or the plumber go down there and pull a permit. And they shouldn't really have a problem with doing that. They're licensed. They should be happy to go down and do that for you. Of course, they're going to charge you for their time, and just as they are for the actual work that they're going to do, it becomes part of the work. And you may be billed at a lesser rate if they can send a clerical staff member to go down and pull the permit. Key to all this is, on the day you move out, that if you've done everything according to Hoyle, then the landlord isn't going to come back after you and ask you to yank it out, or you could have corrupted the title on your property. So we see these situations where somebody has built something onto the building and they can't get through the closing table process because there's no proof that they got a building permit for whatever it is they did, and frankly it's because they didn't. And so then they have to try to go back and correct, and sometimes this means taking it down, and sometimes this means other very negatively impacting things on the process of making a sale. But if you're in business, if you're in operations, what you want is a clean transitions, whether you're moving out of one tenant improvement and into another, or whether you're selling a building. You make all your plans such that when that happens, it's already a big enough headache in and of itself without having to go back in and try to correct for illegal activities. And if you're a buyer and you're looking at this video, there's lots and lots of things that are really tough to find. We ran across a building years ago that was supposed to be on a septic system, and they had tapped into the public sewer and were dumping sewage into the public sewer forever, for a very, very long time. And then somebody were to buy that property, the septic system had been paved over, so it was no longer functional, and the government was looking for remuneration for having used the public sewer for a huge eternity of time. So whoever would get into that building and try to go down and pull a permit would come across these problems, and then, you know, the lawyers get involved and everybody loses. So kind of keep that in mind when you're talking to people about wanting to buy a building, and we just did this and we just did that. Ask them for evidence of the permits that they pulled for doing that work. And back to the same thing, if you think they added an extra electric outlet to their office and it's no big deal, and you're willing to assume that risk just like any other, then go in with your eyes open and assume that risk. But if they put a giant billboard outside on their property and they don't have any permits for it, and you're thinking you're going to lease that billboard out for, you know, $500,000 a year, more than likely it's not going to work out for you. So it's all a matter of how obvious it is. Let's talk about what's supplemental to that process. So I have a great video on planning and zoning, talking about getting entitlements and all that. A lot of things that you construct may make it necessary to get entitlements before you get your building permit, and so I'll put a link on there on this into this video for you to watch that. And then also in understanding how to determine if your project is in budget and do design work to get preliminary costing on it. We'll also give you a link for that. So thanks a lot. My name is Ken Small, and I'm with SSA Architecture in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're at 7040 Laredo Street, Suite C, and that's Las Vegas, Nevada, 89117. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Please like, share, and ring the bell. we have about 36 videos that are mostly frequently asked question type videos, and some that are of general interest, like a solar install I did on my house. So I hope you'll watch them and enjoy them and share them with your friends. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.